me would not be hesitant to get directly involved in something which is about urbanity, in spite of the fact that we are never dissociated from some of these ideas, be they come from cultural scripts around us. When we say cultural scripts, mostly we are thinking of cinema, but then in the time of mediation, cultural scripts would also include all sorts of blog posts, memes, all kind of new age folklore which are in circulation. And hence I found it important, interesting to turn my neck around and see that, the element of rasas are there, whether they can be brought in the discourses on urbanity or not, and in what way they can be brought. What would happen to the image of city if we bring in the elements of rasas in our scheme of analysis? Can one bring them in? Would it be too much of imposition, particularly because the so-called mainstream discourses are very scientific, are very technical, and smart enough to make us believe that, this is how city is, and there are these kind of possibilities with the cities. There can be this transformative possibility with the cities. Cities are also changing so rapidly in the time of this transnational flow, and so on and so forth. So those kind of things have informed our images of city. And here I was trying to think whether there is another possibility to think of city. In what other ways one can think of city, and what image of city would emerge if one just brings in these materials, these rasic materials, so to say, which would be typically expected of a performance studies scholar, right? If you are talking about rasas in folklore studies, in performance studies, even in cinema studies to some extent, it would be fine. But thinking of it in this effort to look at city was, to me, to my mind individually, it was good provocation, right? And that's how it begins for me. It begins with this provocation that there is no need to worry. Or the provocation was whether one is trying to impose these humors, or the humors are already inherent in the thing we call city, right? And obviously, it's very obvious that, it's there. The point is whether we have taken note of those humors in the body of city or not. They have been there, and therefore the idea of cosmopolis historically has been so important. If we get into that direction, we will probably have to do a separate examination of what characteristic of cosmopolis we're talking about, and to what extent the characteristic of cosmopolis would take into account these humors that I'm referring to. So looking at these, possibilities, limitations with the mainstream discourses and the whole body of city as such, giving yet another kind of, idea that, it's still possible. There is still a possibility of starting something new. I succumbed to what I happily call intellectual promiscuity, right? Promiscuity is not always a bad word. We generally think that, it's for anthropologists to look at primitive society and try to understand promiscuity. However, promiscuity is not such a bad word, and it's not only me saying this. Lots of bodies have emerged who try to. I will come to this part a little later. So for me, it was important to have some kind of embodied rationality behind this promiscuous indulgence. Promiscuous in the sense that one was trying to bring various kind of materials together in making sense of what city is, and in what way the image of city could be different from the image of city which we have been familiar with emerging from the dominant discourses. So that's how I get into it, and not only me, I also see that, various other scholars from other different professional walks of life some from typically urban studies background, some other from history, sociology, anthropology background, yet others from policy backgrounds. We all came together and we started having informal discussions. And it is through those discussions that we got to know, and rightly so, that what we are doing when we are thinking of city, actually, we are not thinking of something in abstraction. Or if city is an abstraction, there is a preposition to that abstraction, which is yet another abstraction, that is neighborhood, right? If city is an abstract, there is something presupposed for this abstract, and that is neighborhood. Actually, it is with the neighborhood that the possibility of concretizing the abstractness of city emerges, right? And now, what is this neighborhood? Once again, from all kind of discourses, we discover that is by and large an administrative unit. It is taken as administrative unit, which could be useful for those who are interested in urban governance, those who are interested in transforming certain urban spaces for amelioration of poverty, marginality, so on and so forth, or for betterment of life in a ghetto, say, for example, or for all those purposes and good purposes. Neighborhood is a technical unit, a unit of analysis, which was something furthermore unsettling for us, because we see within neighborhood a very live body. Anywhere we are located, in any part of city we are located, all of us are in that neighborhood as well. It is some kind of in-betweenness. Its neighborhood is kind of in-betweenness. It's outside your home, and yet there is this direct relation with it that you have. Even though you are inside the home, you know that there are those people outside, there are those service providers outside, and your relation is not only instrumental relation with them. Like, you relate to them not only because you have certain kind of needs to be fulfilled by them. There is some sense of fictive kinship that is embedded in this body called neighborhood, which is outside, which is not inside your home, with which you are not able to say whether they are related to you, they're in direct relation with you, but there is connection with you. It can be good connection, bad connection. It can be bad connection in the sense that you are not necessarily all the time happy when you come across them. You may also find them annoying. The people in what you call neighborhood you may find them annoying. They may be also a challenge to your class position, so and so forth. It can be challenge to your caste position. The engendering may be disturbed by their coming and going, and yet it's there. So it's some sort of fictive kinship. Neighborhood is not just a unit of analysis. It's not just a unit of governance. When I say fictive kinship, the fictive part is not meant to demean the meaning of kinship. Kinship is kinship. Some of the feminist scholars have talked about friendship as kinship. In later post-liberalization time, the number of friendship increased in such a manner, and they became so strong that they started replacing some of the old varieties of relationship which came from the traditional kinship network, and friendship became kinship. Friends are more reliable than our uncles and aunts, so to say. It is in that sense that we find this fictive kinship is very powerful kinship. We like it or not, it may annoy us, it may benefit us, it may cause us loss. It may give us an idea that my son's bicycle was stolen recently, and so was my neighbor's bicycle. Both the bicycles were stolen on the same afternoon. And so we were talking about it, and the first guess my neighbor had was that, this guy, the laundry guy who comes here every day, he's the one. I'm sure he's the one who has this whole plan. He knows the movement of the residents here, and therefore he's the one. So let's call the police and let's ask the police to investigate into the matter by interrogating this guy first. So that's what I'm saying, that there may be some of these things which may not make you feel safe. You may request your society or your RWA for more surveillance, for more security cameras, and yet you would know that this is your fictive kinship. You can hate it, you can like it, but you cannot do away with it. It is always there. Your sense of city that we make is through this fictive kinship of neighborhood. And fictive is just a suggestive part. It may not be always fictive. It's also very real. Fictive in the sense, the adjective fictive allows us to see this kinship in enormous possibility. A lot more things can happen with this kind of kinship. And it literally, this kind of kinship can literally turn into a real affinal kinship, the kinship by marriage. Anthropologically, we have learned about the kinship by marriage, the blood kinship and kinship, affinal kinship by marriage. So blood kinship is when my father's bloodline, through that I have my kinship, but with my wife's bloodline, I will have another kinship. That is a final kinship. So a scholar like Chandravarkar, what is his full name? Rajnarayan Chandravarkar's work on mill workers in Bombay, basically tried to look at the formation of this small settlement, Girigaon, I think that's the correct word. And what he pointed out is interesting. It's not just the process of formation of this settlement. What the argument that emerges from his work is that, there is also class endogamy, which is sustained by this new formation, new settlement, new neighborhood, which has emerged. Class endogamy means that the workers who are residing in this settlement, they will prefer to marry their daughters off only with the workers who are residing in some parts of this settlement. They would not like to marry outside the settlement. So there is some sort of class endogamy, which would have been expected in the traditional village setup, where you, with the caste framework, particularly, caste framework is very important in this kind of a final kinship. So here, this fictive kinship may turn into real kinship, as Chandravarkar tried to show us, and so this possibility and all, I'll come to that probably a little later. But what we started doing as a group was that we started looking at this neighborhood as an anchor which can take us forward, as an optic which can give us a way of seeing, as an object of study. And if you want to say, as an episteme, whether this can be a unit of knowledge by itself. This whole process, this collaborative project, was to look at neighborhood in these variegated ways, to look at it as an optic so that it could be used to see the city, right? It becomes our lens to see the city, as an episteme, which means basically that it can inform our judgment, our arguments, and so on and so forth. And what it did for me particularly was that, by looking at neighborhood, suddenly, gradually, it emerged that city is a kind of enchantress. That, I'm not using the word seductress. That would have been a better word, but that also fixes, it limits our understanding, limits our possibility of playing with city. So, so you can occupy this. You'll come in the frame.
Just give it to me. I think. Yeah.
Okay.
I just put it there.
Sit. All right. So one begins to see city as some sort of enchantress. We have heard about enchantress from mythologies mostly. Seductress Helen, the actress Helen, comes in modern cultural script, but enchantress are in legends, right? And therefore, I preferred enchantress to seductress. Seductress is slightly limited. There is no problem with the word seductress as such. So city begins to emerge as an enchantress, imbued with all those rasas, which have been my my pursuit for so many years. And it is there that all kind of possibilities with city emerges. City as an enchantress. Enchantment can be of any kind. Enchantment can be blinding. Enchantment can cause false consciousness, isn't it? But then enchantment is also very healing. And that is why we go to a therapist or a psychoanalyst, or for that matter, we go to a shaman, right? Or to any of those dargah where we get jhar phook done. So enchantment has all kind of possibilities. City as enchantress gives you that, the two sides of the coin exist in this one body called city. And hence it is not, it is hard to take in the beginning of 20th century, someone like George Simmel would write this, account of city, and today it would become very hard for students to go by that account, precisely because there is no fulsomeness of that enchantress or city in that account. The reason why, it is not a problem with the classics. Classics must be read even if we do not like them. I'm looking at you guys because you're the youngest here, and I see a great deal of, and it's not your problem actually. For example, you do sociology, and in most of the sociology programs, classics have been replaced by contemporary texts, contemporary thoughts, contemporary theories. The classical texts are good to refer to, mention, to impress our peer group, but then engaging with classics. So George Simmel's, this is very classical account of George Simmel, and we figured out that this classical account of George Simmel is also an account shared by most of the top-notch minds of modernity in that time frame. Right, so that's why I started with this Gandhian idea, right? Most of us, we thought of city. Forget about Gandhian idea or early 20th century. Someone like Ashish Nandi's reflection on coming to city and what sense of city one makes is not that old, and yet there is that sense of loss. When one comes to, there is this already past judgment as far as city is concerned, that you would be lost when you go to city, right? When I had come to Delhi first time, I remember crossing the road was such a horror. It was very difficult for me to cross the road. I mean, it used to take me 15-20 minutes to navigate and how to cross the road. I'll be halfway and then I'll be waiting. And a few times I also broke down in the middle of the road because I did not know how to. It's also because there is a judgment already in our head that we are in the big bad city and we'll be lost here. Problem is, there's no problem with this badness, but then there may be something more to city than just badness, and hence there would be something more than just anomalies in the city, and hence enchantress of called city can sit any side, can adopt any humor. Can be loving and can be also deeply hating, right? And therefore, all kind of formations happen within city. So this was a different kind of city which begin to appear when we look at it through the optic of neighborhood. It is also not the city which will necessarily serve us that millennial developmental goal, right? If we are thinking of a city which will serve us millennial developmental goal, then in the first place we will not have. We will not think about city as enchantress. Then the city has to be a cog in the larger machinery. Then the city has to be our slave, a conceptual slave to our framework. But if we allow city to be enchantress, looking at it through neighborhood, then it is not city of George Simmel. Then it is not a city which will serve these millennial developmental goals expected by most of the state managers of our time, right? As well as civil society or think tank bodies. So this is a different city. This can flop. This can become blockbuster. So it's very difficult. It's enchantress. So it's very difficult to predict the real nature of what this will react in what manner is very difficult to predict. So this does not mean, however, that one is trying to debase or undermine or undervalue all kind of endeavors, very useful endeavors to take care of urban poor, or do some kind of health hygiene related or developmental programs of civil society in the spaces of city. It's not to debase it. However, one is trying to fight for a broader idea of city here, right? Which did not be exactly what some of these other endeavors of civil society, of governance body may be expecting it to become. So looking at city through the optic of neighborhood makes it a larger sensorial body, right? Sensorial body. Now, when the moment we say sensorial body, we get into certain notions. Sensuousness is always bound to certain notions. However, the optic of the epistemic optic of neighborhood challenges our limited understanding of sensuousness or sensorial. Sensorial. How does it challenge? Here, sensuousness is essentially relational. It's not just about my senses. It's not just about how I feel about something. It's about how I feel about something in relation with others. So this is always the moment we think of city, sensuous city through neighborhood, it is a relational experience. It's a relational experience of various kind of affects. It's not something to be reduced into isolated individual experience. It is not necessarily also to be generalized for a whole community, but it certainly involves intersubjective blocks, and through that intersubjective blocks we experience in the framework of neighborhood. So this gives you a little bit of brief about what neighborhood means for us and how neighborhood leads to a certain kind of city. Let me return to something more personal. Like I said that I happen to be outsider, relatively more outsider than other of my group. Like Sadanji was already working on the idea of neighborhood, and he had already conducted a research, and probably his monograph is going to be out any day now. And likewise, other scholars who came from different walks of life, many of them practitioners, some of them in university, some of them with the different policy and think tank bodies. They came in with their own interest, very clear interest. For me, it was necessary to define my interest, to really figure out what is my interest in it. And first and foremost, the interest that I had was methodological interest. I happen to be a student of methodology. And when I say this, I basically mean to suggest that I'm not happy with the reduction of methodology into just method and technique. Methodology is for me something bigger. It's a larger question. And it has, I mean, anybody who has gone through all kind of methodological debates would have this difficulty, discomfort about the perpetuity of certain ideas in spite of our criticism of them when it comes to methodology. When it comes to methodology, most of the students from masters to PhD, when it comes to methodology, we tend to write just about this method I have taken, this technique I have done, and this is how I have conducted research. But methodology is more than that. Methodology is about our mindset. Methodology is about our way of seeing. I mean, what kind of glasses we wear when we go around seeing people, talking to people, what kind of things I decide to hear and what kind of things I miss out hearing, right? So methodology is a bigger question. And for me, it was first and foremost was this methodological interest that, there is a possibility of doing some of those things which were recommended by a body called Gulbenkian Commission in 1992. Gulbenkian Commission was an international body which was in 1990, which was given the responsibility to rethink the nature of social sciences worldwide. because it was understood that social sciences, modern social sciences, has failed to meet the objectives it had, and therefore it is high time that one has to restructure social sciences. And they also produced a report. It's called Gulbenkian Commission report, which was published as one of the books. It's titled "Open Social Sciences," right? And throughout the very slim report, which is now available as a book, the argument, and it was led by Emmanuel Wallerstein. So the argument was that social science will open and will begin to respond to the contemporary challenges and will serve us better if we change this very necessary part of methodology, which is that all the researches involve not only the object of study, it primarily involves, to begin with, the self of the researcher, right? And if we could start on the point that any research has to start on this point, that the self of researcher and the object of study are related, and that relation has to be maintained throughout the research. Probably that would make it necessary for most of the social scientists to break free from well-kept disciplinary boundaries, right? That was the necessity they had pointed out, that this kind of methodological churning will help everybody come out of the disciplinary silos, right? And many of us throughout our training have been trained to be comfortably, happily live in the prison we call our disciplines, isn't it? And that was the idea of that Gulbenkian Commission. And I felt that when one is trying to make sense of neighborhood, and through neighborhood one is trying to understand city and how sensuous is this city, what kind of enchantment is this city. When one is trying to do this, one would not be able to maintain that intellectual monogamy of the kind that we have been trained to be, or one would not afford to have that blindfolded loyalty to one discipline. It would inherently be an interdisciplinary task. There would not be any need of this fanciful utterance that my work is interdisciplinary, my work is transdisciplinary, my work is multidisciplinary, my work is non-disciplinary. No need of this utterance, because by nature this work will be feeding on variety of sources, right? If one is trying to understand one's own life, when we are thinking of neighborhood, we are thinking of ourselves. We are not thinking of just others. We are thinking of others and ourselves in relations, right? So that very moment we are changing, we are opening social sciences. So this was my first entry point, which drew me very close to it. Other than that, this whole perpetuity of the old methodological binaries such as objectivity and subjectivity, almost taken for granted binary, right? So that kind of thing comes to, which was also central to the Gulbenkian Commission report. That comes to the question. It gets questioned throughout by various contributors, that instead of reproducing that binary, one has to think of the possibility of reading irrespective of those binaries, if not beyond those binaries, irrespective of those binaries. That is one thing. Likewise, in the history of social science, second point, which drew me closer to this whole project, second point is that in the history of social sciences, we have seen various kind of moment of epistemological breaks, so to say. What kind of epistemological breaks? And they're termed so. They're a long time ago with Wittgenstein, we heard of the linguistic turn in social sciences, isn't it? Then much later, we hear of ontological turn, affect turn, emotions turn, visual turn, right? Now you have sensorial turn, right? Which is fine. With all these terms, it really sounds like very nice Bollywood kind of social science. My point is that with so many terms, as students, as teachers, when we talk about those terms, how can we stay happily unturned even when we are already familiar with these terms? What do these terms do to our own focus? As a result, because this question has not been asked with the due intensity as to why we remain unturned in spite of so many turns in social sciences, And as a result, because this question is not answered, as a result, with every turn in social sciences, we see birth of many more disciplinary or subdisciplinary silos. Many more subdisciplinary silos. As a result, there would be an affect study group, there would be a sense study group, and the sense study group has started fighting with some of the anthropologists, David Howes and Tim Ingold. They have very interesting debate in which David Howes would say that the real anthropology now would be only sensory anthropology, and Tim Ingold would say that sensory ethnography is already involved in age-old anthropology. So what is new that you are offering? Anyways, the point is that with all these turns, there have been many more silos emerging, which means many more small little island emerging, and that is disturbing, and that would be taken care of in something like this, where all the silos will have to necessarily come together. There is no other option. This coming together is something which made my passage into it important. Coming together of silos is also like breaking down the epistemological Brahmanism by which one maintains this Puritan pollution, that if you're an economist, you are supposed to make no references whatsoever to say what literary work, because it will make your own understanding of the thing impure. So that kind of thing. If you're a sociologist, likewise, even sociologists, because for some reason sociologists started competing with economists at some point of time. I don't know why. Maybe because they wanted to be stakeholders in the nation building program, and that's the argument I've brought. So this is the second point with which I get into looking at, if I really want to understand city as a sensuous body with all possibilities, all kind of possibilities, probably it would be interesting to pull together strings from all these silos rather than maintain those silos. Thirdly and lastly, as I already said in the beginning, I come from a background which has engagement with folklore, cultural scripts of various kinds, be it in little tradition or great tradition, doesn't matter. And therefore, through these discussions on neighborhood, it began to appear that city itself is a performed body, it's a performative entity, right? The moment I said enchantress, it basically hinted at that possibility of understanding city as some kind of performative entity. And what is getting day in and day out performed in this body of enchantress is affective practices of people in their day-to-day life. That is getting performed every now and then in terms of our prejudices, in terms of our preferences, our likes, dislikes, somebody's bicycle getting stolen, somebody passing judgment about the possibility of who has stolen the bicycle, so and so forth. Many such examples. With all these things, basically, we are passing judgments, and we are becoming part of this larger proscenium pulled around, larger proscenium theater pulled around by this enchantress called sensuous city. So with this, I jumped on the bandwagon, which some of them are here. Sadanji must be here, or I hope he has not left.
No, he stayed there.
At any point of time, if you want to butt in, please allow your butt to get in. So with these kind of ideas, we had already spent some time. We were having discussions on our own. And then we thought that, it's high time we should formalize this whole project for which everybody has been working. And what is the best way of formalizing it? Best way of formalizing it to put this proposal to ICSSR, so that we get some, not just some money, it also becomes like official that, we are working together and we have some kind of support. And we happily proposed it to ICSSR. As it always happens, and so-called experts at ICSSR were flabbergasted. Their ultimate judgment was that there is something in this proposal, there is something in this idea which we can't get, and they kept asking this question as to why this work is not using the grammar of the language of urban studies. Like, we are already familiar with the kind of things we say, we do in urban studies, in this kind of urban developments, urban governance. And if this proposal is not using this, the note is not concept note is not using that style, is not using that lingo, is not using that kind of epistemological bent, and that deviation was slightly strange to them, in spite of the fact that they were invited as experts in a body by a body which is supposed to encourage original, innovative researches. I mean, that's what it says in its preamble. So therefore, ICSR was not the place for us. And we happily continued doing things which we do best, and that is self-funded project. When nothing works out, we do self-funded project, which basically means nothing and which means everything at another level. And in that, continuous engagement with, we tried curating our own list of canons. Even though we were not very loyal to any of the canons, we did have to engage with canons. But then we very particularly thought that, it is not just text which matters in our pursuit of neighborhood and in our pursuit of understanding the body of city through the optic of neighborhood. It cannot be just text. It cannot be just epistemological body, because it's eventually about affective experience. And hence, along with the text, there has to be components about contexts, which would be non-textual, which need not be a book, which need not be some kind of eruditely written text. It can be a cultural script, and therefore we started referring to a few films, few blog posts. For example, it may be referred to somewhere. Two very important films were our reference point on several occasions. One was Amit Mitra and Shambhu Mitra directed Jagte Raho, which was, I think, produced by Raj Kapoor's production company. I can't say exactly. He acted in that. Raj Kapoor acted in that. Another was Chingari, which came out. It's a Pakistani film. Came out in 1960s, early 1960s. And in both the films, we felt that there was a strong statement made about what we are exploring here, the sensuousness of city, and how do we respond to that sensuousness of city, and in what ways optic of neighborhood comes into picture in our engagement and judgment about the sensuousness of city. So if you can recall, and I'm sure many of you have seen Jagte Raho, for example. Chingari you may not have seen. I can very quickly say Chingari was about somebody from outside coming to Karachi, city of Karachi. This is a film in 1960s. 1960s and 1970s was the time when Karachi was known as Disco Karachi. This was an epithet for Karachi. It has such fascinating nightlife, and it was a very happening place. From Disco Karachi, recently I read a piece which by an urban sociologist who wrote that, whose basic point was that from Disco Karachi, Karachi has become now no man's land. Now you will not see the same kind of hustle and bustle in Karachi anymore, the same kind of nightlife. So the film Chingari is about that Disco Karachi, in which where somebody from outside, non-Karachiite, comes to live for a while and starts passing judgment almost every day about this nightlife, has this strong lament about living in a city which has this kind of sinful practice of men, women going out throughout the night, they're drinking, dancing, and so on and so forth. And there is this song, very famous song, you can find that song on YouTube, Karachi ye roshni ka sheher. So you, for a while, you would be confused whether he's celebrating Karachi or he's lamenting about this roshni of Karachi, right? So it leaves you with this ambiguous feeling that the place which is a den of civilizational sin. You can feel the wordplay that I'm doing with some other kind of idea of the den of sin, which was village. So den of civilizational sin, Karachi is also a place of possibility for someone like him who has come from outside seeking for job. This was the time when roti kapda aur makan was an important axiom for many of these job-seeking migrants coming to the cities. On the other hand, in Jagte Raho, there is something more interesting happening. In Karachi, in Chingari, there was some kind of secular optimism with which the film ended. In Jagte Raho, it was even more interesting. In Jagte Raho, you have Calcutta-like city. It's a gated society with some high rises, visibly high rises, and there is this misfit, an outsider from somewhere, from some village he has come, a rugged look, and is basically seeking to quench his thirst. He's thirsty, and his night journey, and he's just seeking for water to drink, and he trespasses into this, gated society. In the city could be either Calcutta or Bombay, then Bombay, and he gets into that high-rise society and starts asking for water. And he in return, he gets anger, disgust, distrust, so on and so forth. Right? You instantly get that sense that he also gets very urbane sympathy from one character who played by this magnanimous actor Motilal, who also sings this song in the film, Zindagi Khwab Hai, Khwab Mein Jhoot Kya. And he's sympathetic toward this guy. He doesn't have water. He's a drunkard. He's a high-class drunkard. So he doesn't have water. Sympathetically, he offers his alcohol, but the gentleman is not. And the film ends. He's thirsty. And then finally, he gets to someone in the same city, in the same neighborhood. He gets to someone who looks like a very pious female figure played by Nargis. And the film is the ending scene of the film. And Nargis is worshipping, and she's singing this song, Jago Mohan Pyare. And then she offers water to this thirsty man. And the film ends there. And it's very suggestive, isn't it? So the den of civilizational sin is also the den of all kind of, pious possibility. Right. So yes, this is the ending, just like a film, it ends here. So I would like to end by, suggesting that, in addition to text, there was this, importance of context throughout our journey. And today, when I think of all these, I'm basically revisiting some of those things. One can ask very important question, and that is my last question, as to how the word difference, which was so dear to most of the discussions, postmodern discussions, had this, emphasized this word difference, be it in feminist literature, in subaltern literature, and the literature on margin and marginality. But here, the word difference acquires some other kind of meaning. There is difference, and there are those kind of, problems of difference. But then there is something which is also running across. It could be hatred, it could be love, no matter which emotion is running across. And that is what is keeping the fictive kinship of neighborhood alive. And through that fictive kinship of neighborhood, we try to make sense of the body of the sensuous city. At some point of time, let me end by saying, at some point of time, the body of sensuous city may have been analyzed on the following the scheme of roti, kapda, or makan, which is not yet gone. That scheme still has importance, but probably I'm guessing that there is some more additions to that scheme. I always keep asking, if city is really such a bad place for many of us, or for some of us, then why do we still continue to live? Probably the answer would be roti, kapda, or makan. But then I also figured out that probably this answer is incomplete. There are some more additions to this answer. And if I can allow myself to indulge in some one half-baked idea, I would say that in addition to roti, kapda, or makan, there is also a great deal of love, sex, and dhokha in the city, which makes everybody live here, even if not happily ever after. Thank you.
Thank you. I can see there are questions. There's something in the QA box which Usha Rao had put in a long time ago. So I'm going to ask Usha to speak and ask her question. Usha, would you like to ask your question? You can unmute and ask.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Hi. Thanks. Thank you for that talk. Yeah. My question was, I had two parts, if I'm allowed. I did like to ask both parts. One is, how do you distinguish between rasas and affect? If you could say a little bit about that. And secondly, the idea that cities are actually Thrift calls cities maelstorms of affect. So in urban geography and anthropology, which is my mother discipline, cities have been talked about as sites through the lens of affect. So I was wondering if the speaker could say a little bit about how his work would be similar to or different from this body of literature that already exists. Thanks.
Thanks, Usha. Maybe we can take another couple of questions. Stephanie, do you want to step in?
Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you for this very interesting presentation. Actually, I also had a question. I'm very intrigued by this idea of the sensuous city. And I wanted to ask you if you could specify a bit more. I mean, you said precisely that you're very interested in methodology, but this is, for me, the big question. How do you investigate the sensuous city concretely? Because I can imagine two ways of doing this, and I wanted to know whether some of the authors in this book have tried these ways. One way would be, for instance, to use the tools of the sociology of emotions, concepts like emotion work. I'm thinking of neighborhood associations. I mean, for instance, the RWAs that I've studied in Delhi, I know that, besides taking care of, making sure that sweepers do their job every day, they also organize, the celebration of festivals, which could be very well identified as a kind of emotion work. By inviting all residents to celebrate festivals, RWAs actually prescribe some emotions. They prescribe love in the neighborhood. They prescribe pride about the neighborhood. But that's just an impression that I have. So I wanted to ask you, did some of the authors in the book take that way of research? And another path that I could imagine was about, investigating the modern channels through which cities build their image. And you have been speaking very much about the generic city, but I think it's very important to speak about the specific cities. And to me also, this is where the rasa theory is interesting when compared to the more generic term of, more universal term of emotions. And here I'm following up on Usha's question. I think if I understand it correctly, rasas evoke moods, right? And moods are very close to the idea of mahol, atmosphere. And atmosphere, I think, is very important when you want to ask about the emotional experience of city. And the atmosphere of specific cities, of course, come to us through works of fictions. You have talked about films. There are, of course, important books. I was just thinking while you were talking about Pushpant Singh on Delhi, Kiran Nagarkar on Mumbai. I mean, these are just books that shape our idea of Delhi and Mumbai, even if we have never set foot in these cities. So I was wondering whether a contemporary way to investigate how the mahol is created and therefore shaping our experience of city, even if we don't realize it, can we find it perhaps in the contemporary branding of cities? For instance, in the smart city mission, city authorities, urban local bodies are very busy communicating, right, about the quality, the very specific quality of life in this specific city. And I was wondering whether it would be worth, really taking seriously this kind of, obviously institutional communication and checking out, I don't know how, but it might be worth it, checking out whether it produced any actual impact on the way the city's residents actually imagine their city. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. I suppose your exposition has already answered the question, so it makes my life easier. To begin with, and that is common between Usha and Stephanie about rasas and its relation with affect, or whether rasas would be realized if there is mahal. So when I use the word rasa, I am not just whimsically using it. I am making a reference, very clear reference in my mind to that very old fellow called Bharat, and not even to him actually, as he was translated by some of the Bengali scholars, Manmohan Mukherjee or somebody, like there are many translations. There is one translation. Anyway, so through translation that we have read Natya Shastra, and in Natya Shastra, rasa is primarily, the word rasa is primarily to refer to emotions. But then it does not stop here. Emotions as they are enacted, emotions as they are found in Abhinay and Anubhav. Otherwise, rasa will have otherwise no meaning unless it has translated into an Abhinay and Anubhav. If you want to say, yes, Mahal is created by the coming together of Abhinay and Anubhava. Right, Abhinay and Anubhav. There are people enacting those humors, and through enactment, they are creating this ecology of experience. That ecology of experience one can call is Mahal. So that is how the track, the moving of rasa, unfolding of rasa is like this. That yes, it translates to affect at a very later stage. To begin with, it is not something which is commonly felt by all, because it is yet to be enacted. When it is enacted and it becomes part of the larger ecology of experience, of course, one can say that now there is a cachet of affect related to rasas. So this is how I pitch my usage of rasa when I am trying to make sense of city. Second question, Stephanie, yeah. So what are those concrete things through which one can try to get to the sensuousness of some of those things you have already mentioned, like the bodies all around, the associations, but not only these associations, some of the contributors have looked at sacred bodies. One student, one PhD scholar, who is now PhD or has looked at the Mukti Bhavan, Mumukshu Ashram in Banaras. Mumukshu Ashram is for those. It's like what do you call it in English? The last hospice, some kind of hospice. Yeah, some kind of hospice. But there is another word. It's hotel salvation or some sort of hotel salvation. And as to how in that kind of setup where
palliative care.
Yes, there is care by the organization, but then all the members know that they are staying there so that they die. They're waiting for death. While staying there, they're waiting for death. Now, in that kind of situation, which is like a limbo, isn't it? It's like just before crossing the river, you're waiting for the Yama to appear and take you away. Even in that kind of situation, there was this research which tried to show us that there is this sense of neighborhood emerging. And through that neighborhood, they get a larger idea about how the socio-spatial unfolding of affect take place among those residents. This is just one example. There could be various other kind of examples. In the case of, Dhaka, Nilphamari, not Dhaka, in Bangladesh, we noticed that, this whole Nilphamari, which used to be just a small village at some point of time, but it's almost like a quasi small town. It's a kasbah, kind of kasbah now. Relationship would not be possible in Nilphamari anymore if they are not relating through the kind of content that they watch on television. The relation is largely through their conversation about the television soap that they have watched. And by the way of discussing the characters, by the way of the plots that they saw, they're talking about them, and therefore they are in relation. Therefore, people are in some kind of relation. So this mediated relationship also creates a kind of this fictive kinship that neighborhood I have tried to project as. So not only some of those very known bodies or instruments through which one can get to see the enchantress called city, probably many more other things like theater. there's a space called theater, and the way we come together, even if there is not familiarity among people, there is a pattern everybody is following. There is certain kind of exchange and so forth, which would also amount to the transactions of emotions. And it is not the first and last time. One keeps coming there again and again. One develops memory about it. There is certain kind of nostalgia about it. Even if the theater has shut down, after many years, we visit that area and we say, and you know, this is where when you were this old, I had brought you to watch this film. This is where and right outside, there was very nice komcha of, you know, Golgappa wala, and you have so much of story to tell each other, which basically meant what? There was already an abhinay and anubhav which had taken place and is being recycled, and it's in association with that, you know, space where this affect had unfolded. So many such, there are many such avenues which is unlocked if we allow this whole this anchor to become our anchor. This is something very quickly I would say. And you're right, the examples that you have mentioned, festivals are of course some of those kind of examples, some of that kind of example. But I would also say something less, something more mundane. Say, for example, the pattern of quarreling in a particular kind of neighborhood, the pattern of dispute, the kind of dispute that occurs between neighbors, or even this idea of, you know, padosi and padosan is not a dead idea. It's not that, you know, at some point of time when in a patriarchal setup, people were frustrated and they were reading all sorts of, you know, stories about padosan coming from Mastram or those, you know, those writers. The idea of padosi and padosan is still in currency. Notions might have changed, right? But then those terms are still in currency, and associated with them are those, you know, unfolding of affect. So, so many things one can probably explore. Many of those, you know, routes one can take to explore this, you know, larger area. I hope I have tried to, if not answer, probably just make some response to, some attempt to respond to the question.
Thank you. I think Aditya wanted to pitch in. He had a few thoughts and a couple of, I mean, it's a pretty pointed question. Aditya, do you want to come in? You can unmute yourself and speak.
Yeah.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes, yes. Please ask your question.
Yes, ma'am. मैं आदित्य कुमार हूँ, मैम. रिसर्च स्कॉलर सेंट्रल यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ साउथ बिहार गया से बोल रहा हूँ. और जैसे मैम एक अर्बन सोशियोलॉजी का एक मतलब we try to study consequences of जो है urbanization in urban sociology. So in terms of it has effect in outlying areas, like apart from the core city, we study especially the outlying areas, which is how it engages in terms of work and labor. So basically, sir, by shifting to this approach of like looking at like within the core city, like within Delhi core area is like International Habitat Center, and it's like a neighborhood. We have many intellectual like institute like Alliance Francaise, CSD, many things are there. So like we people go there and they listen, talk, and many things are going in everyday life. So basically, likewise, we in Delhi we have many slums. Like I came across a Adivasi camp in Nehru Nagar. So they are they are procuring some herbs and selling in the cities. So there are many, and I also the thing it like sir has pointed out that in slum people marry in slum only, not the relationship like even marriage is in that maybe 10 house apart they marry each other. So basically why it is important to study in the neighborhood, but what like upon observation it is quite it is surprising to see that pattern, that type of pattern. So it is useful, but it is departing from the like urban sociology framework. So I want comment.
Thank you, Aditya. Before I try to say something, Aditya, about your question, I must return to Utsha Rao. She had very valid observation to make that there is already engagement with affect in anthropological texts. So what is new about what is new here? I am afraid I would not be able to give you a very good answer, but there can be a very bad answer. And the bad answer is that when it comes to looking at urbanity, probably it has not been so much popular to take the route of affect, number one. Number two, even in urban anthropology, as far as I can recall, there may be exceptional work. This is not to suggest that this is from nowhere. This is in total vacuum. I referred to some of those which, or probably I did not make all those references pretty articulate. But there are those works like Raban. He's not a trained anthropologist, but Jonathan Raban, the Soft City, right? It's Jonathan Raban. Soft City is a wonderful work, and it's all about making sense of affect in a city, that too in London. So therefore, what we are trying to do is that we give some more currency through these works of adopting an approach to understand affect as it is. Number one. Number two, Usha, if I can continue along this line, I would also say that here the attempt is not made to keep our understanding of affect in those age-old or familiar silos. Even if there is an understanding of affect in anthropology, it is not so to say, not the mainstream anthropology. The mainstream anthropologists would do an ethnography where affect would be probably a third fiddle or fourth fiddle in the larger drama, right? So it never gets into, and that is a whole dispute between Hovis, the sensory anthropology guy, and Tim Ingold. And that dispute can be very enriching for many of us who are wary about reproducing, perpetuating those silos that have been already created within subdisciplines. So within subdiscipline of anthropology, there is attention to affect, but affect would be considered a dubious material in the larger, in the mainstream anthropology. The mainstream means the real big wigs of anthropology would treat carefully when it comes to not only affect, when it comes to visuals, when it comes to the whole ontological gamut of ideas, so on and so forth. So that's what we are trying to. Number one, it's not a presentation in vacuum. Number two, we are also trying to break. We're trying not to suggest that affect can appear as a pure affect thing alone. Affect can also come along with the visuality. Affect can also come along with other kind of similar materials. It can come along with performative performances. So that's what we were trying to. I thought one had to. It's an important question that you have raised. Coming back to Aditya, I can understand your anxiety, your concern that the neighborhoods are so divided. There is this intellectual neighborhood. You rightly said. We always make fun of that kind of divide. Some years ago, when JNU was the bone of contention, and who says some years ago is still is bone of contention by and large. But right when it had just broken out, there was one incident which took place, Aditya, and I'm sure if you were in Delhi, you must be aware of this wonderful scenario, wonderful, powerful. It's almost like a Tarantino drama taking place right in the open. So what happened? That across the road from JNU, there is this Munirka urban village, right? And from Munirka, the residents of Munirka came across the road and they started pelting stone at the university gate, right? When this whole issue of, the urban Naxal or anti-national people living in JNU, it had just started. This is what happened. The residents from Munirka village came out across the road, and they started pelting stone on the gates, on different parts, different sides, right? And one could see exactly what you were saying, that this segregation of this, it would have, that incident probably would have vindicated your anxious articulation that, there are this, such segregated neighborhood. One point, fair enough. When it comes to creating a Tarantino kind of drama, that point is wonderful point. However, we also know that none of the JNU students as well as professors are unrelated to Munirika. Yeah, they keep passing by. Also, those residents of Munirika, those Jat residents or non-Jat residents of Munirika, they are also not unrelated to JNU. So JNU gate early in the morning opens for them so that they can take walk. So it is not to suggest that the neighborhoods are so dramatically separated. There is crisscrossing, and that is the beauty of neighborhood. There would be crisscrossing, we like it or not. We may be anti-national, but they have to come and walk on the roads around us. They have to take an anti-national pathways, even if they do not like us and they felt stones. So that, I suppose, when we are anxious about certain things which are very evident, we also need to be slightly watchful about jumping to a conclusion. That's what I would say, Aditya.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? No more hands raised up. Partho, do you have questions? Anybody else in the room?
Yes.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Well, because this is the neighborhood question, I prefer speaking in Hindi. Reason being, because the words you can't express them in English itself. Right. So that's how I go. I start with the society, the neighbors, how the neighborhood came into being and why it is there. This is a question I'm going to ask you, right? जब भी हंटर था आदमी तो कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं थी. ये तो जब एग्रीकल्चर एरा में आया तो तब गांव का विकास हुआ. गांव से शहर में आया, शहर नहीं था, पहले गांव था. गांव में मैंने एक कविता करता हूँ, कविता लिखती, हर गांव में बसता है एक और गांव, हर शहर में होता है एक और शहर. तो इट्स अ वेरी लॉन्ग पॉइंट, बट आई एम नॉट गोइंग इन डिटेल दैट. सो आई एम वेल विद इन इट. तो जो ये इसका विकास हुआ, ये गांव से हुआ. गांव में जो दूसरा गांव बसता है उसमें तेली, चमार, कुमार, पहाड़, नाई एंड ऑल दोस पीपल एट द एज ऑफ द विलेज, राइट. मैं गांव का आदमी,
अलग अलग टोला होगा.
मैं गांव में रहा हूँ, स्टार्टिंग द विलेज, राइट. तो ये उस इलाके से ये जो गांव बसता है, हर गांव में, और वही चीज शहर में आ घुसी. इट इज अ कंटिन्यूएशन ऑफ द सेम थिंग. तो शहर में भी आप देखते हैं कि एक ना, जिसको आप गेटोस बोलते हैं, वो वेस्ट में, मैं वेस्ट में भी 15-20 साल रहा हूँ. तो वहां पर भी गेटोस हैं, लंदन में भी है, न्यूयॉर्क में भी है, हर जगह पे. हम उसका जो आकार है ना, वो अलग है, वो तरह का, और उनकी जो सोशल इकोनॉमिक स्टेटस है वो डिफरेंट है, बट इट इज देयर, राइट. इट इज देयर. द क्वेश्चन इज नाउ, I can go on and on. I want to stop it here because other people have to speak. Right? How this neighborhood, how this came into being and why it is there? That's the question. And it is all started from the agriculture society developing in the villages, coming into the cities. I hope I believe in evolution. I believe in how everything, my hair, my nose, and every damn thing in this world came into being as it is there. That is the question I always pose. That is I'm posing over here. Why it is there, how it came into me, and why it is there.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. There is.
And should we don't go beyond that. We never, even the scholar don't say whether it should be there or not. That village within the village should continue. It is continued, but nobody will talk to them. Cities, it ghettos are ghettos. About more than 50% people are in the ghettos. Right? But nobody wants to say why it should be there. Should we continue with it? Should we continue? I work in the ghettos, so I know what life like is there. Living in filth. People are living in filth. It's a filthy life. Right? Why should we be there? Why should we be there? Why should we have it?
Sure, sir. I think he gets your question.
Genuine आपका है ये concern.
So इसी से related, there are a couple of other questions which are not responding so much to your talk, but there's a question from Vikas Giri on the need to review urban poverty alleviation related schemes, and he's sort of listed a bunch of schemes. So I guess the question is about poverty and how would you relate to the government's interventions in the context of what you're trying to say about neighborhoods? And there's another question from Garima Shukla on the question of gender, education, and slums. And again, how does this way of looking at neighborhoods speak to these? I know you mentioned these sort of statist ideas and notions through which ICSSR could not see your project because it wasn't being framed through what it is used to other people framing it. But I think members of the audience are also having that same struggle in the sense that they're used to thinking about the city through certain ideas, and they also believe that these schemes are meant to solve the kind of problems that Sir was elucidating. And so how does your research actually then, does it speak to these things? Is it trying to take us completely away from it? Is it trying to shine a light on this from a different direction? I mean, I think people are asking you to speak to that.
At this juncture, may I invite Dr. Jha to say a few things? Probably, Sadanji, if you're...
Okay, yeah, and thank you, Mukta, and thank you to CPR for having this conversation. It actually, am I audible?
Yes,
Yes, you're audible.
Yeah, actually, before coming to these two questions, I am sorry that the last question I was not on the, I could not comprehend properly because I was on phone, but I'm getting the broader sense. See, when we started this project, we were very clear that neighborhood approach to city cannot answer all the questions. We were very sure. However, we were also try to engage with what Stephen very eloquently said, atmosphere of the city, specifics of the city. And when we talk about the specifics of the city or the atmosphere of the city, what can it be when we talk about the urban life? One way to look at this atmosphere is in terms of the spatial atmosphere, a spatial mahol. Mahol has its own space. So what can be that space? And neighborhood came handy for us in that sense. Now, this is not to avoid the very pertinent questions about poverty, inequality, ghettos or slums in urban life, but there are different kinds of inequalities, different kinds of spatial inequalities also. How to address that? For example, how to address inequalities which are giving rise to Dalit bastis. For example, in Kanpur, one of the chapters in our volume by Vijay Kumar. How to address those, spatial inequalities, the way people are excluded, large section of society gets excluded and gets marginalized, gets ghettoized. That's also a kind of different kind of poverty, to say. Poverty is not only in economic terms. There are different kinds of inequities, exploitations, how to address those specific urban experiences. And, or, when we talk about ghetto, when we talk about the marginalization, अभी जो एक साउथ गया के यूनिवर्सिटी के छात्र बता रहे थे कि सिटी ऑल्सो एग्जिस्ट इन द मार्जिन्स, मुक्ता जो अभी यहाँ संचालन कर रही हैं, उनका काम है, उनका चैप्टर है जो कि गुड़गांव के जो पेरीफरी में एक जो श्रमिक बस्ती है, माइग्रेंट श्रमिक बस्ती, उसको लेकर काम है. तो ये जो अलग अलग फॉर्म्स ऑफ अर्बन एक्सपीरियंसेस हैं जो बहुत स्पेशलाइज्ड हैं, उनके जो स्पेसेस हैं, उन स्पेस के थ्रू हाउ टू एड्रेस द पर्टिकुलरिटीज ऑफ अर्बन एक्सपीरियंस, बिकॉज अदरवाइज whenever we talk about urban, we talk about a very abstract space, a space which emerges as a kind of merely nodes in different, global network. But these spaces also, these urban, bodies, urban localities also have very particular spatial locations. जो माहौल की बात आप स्टेफनी ने बहुत बढ़िया से कहा, तो how to look at those अनुभव or the experience in a very concrete spatial terms. And this is where, we thought that this approach to neighborhood can engage few questions, not all the questions, obviously, but few questions about looking at city and urban experience.
Thank you, Sadanji. Does anyone else have questions? There are people in the room. Ananya, do you have questions? और किसी के पास सवाल है? We can ask Dave for final comments and wind up as well.
No need.
No need. You don't want to give final comment.
I think what
एक सवाल है. सवाल. So you talked about relational, sort of a relational sense, and we've taken neighborhood, and you talked specifically about the neighborhood not being only a unit of analysis. तो neighborhood क्यों फिर? क्या ये केवल हम scale की बात कर रहे हैं? Yeah, and I'm here. I think I'm thinking of the semantics of it also. तो are we thinking मोहल्ला? I mean, जब हम neighborhood शब्द use कर रहे हैं, तो आपकी imagination में वो unit आया कहाँ से? वो scale है, या वो एक entity है, या उस शब्द का कुछ meaning है जिसके साथ हम चल रहे हैं?
अगर one word answer, sorry.
हाँ नहीं बोलिए.
If one word answer can be permitted, even though this is not MCQ, it is relation. When you say para, oita para jao, in Bangla, it means that you are referring to certain web of relations that you are asking someone to enter, or someone is coming out of that.
No, but the question
mohalla.
Why? But when we had, like Sadan ne bola, there was a lot of emphasis on spatiality, right? So how do we relate this web of relations to the neighborhood as a spatial entity? Because when you've written and when you've collated a whole bunch of things with neighborhoods right at the title,
yes.
The person who looks at it is immediately imagining a spatial entity of some kind, and is ascribing it a scale, is ascribing it a spatial structure of some kind.
See,
so how do we relate these?
Just scale would neutralize the whole
Exercise.
The balloon that has been created,
Right.
or balloon which is already there. This is what this is the dilemma which Arjuna Padurai also had when he was talking about scalarity and locality.
Yes.
Instead of getting into that dilemma here, the idea is to see, you are right, space is socio-spatial relationality, which is also with this appendage of experiences, everyday life, practices, processes. So this is the more spelled out formulation for neighborhood. If we start giving it mohalla, just say for example, a basti, sometimes it is ghetto, sometimes it is not so. It's very bounded. It can be porous, it can be open-ended, but it has its own characteristic of being partly closed, partly open. But basically, we are referring to this larger formulation of social spatial relationality in which we experience the unfolding of affect in our day-to-day life.
Dave, if I can also come in here.
Yes.
And this is the question you asked, Mukta. We also have been asking this question.
Yes.
And the one way we thought that neighborhood is certainly a scale, but it is also relational, as Dave is saying. It is experiential. Hence, whenever we talk about experience, sensuousness or emotion are bound to come. So in that sense, it is sensuous, it is subjective. But more than that, we thought that, we were not interested in defining the term. We were not, we thought that from very beginning that ours is a project of not achieving the definition of the term. But what we were aiming at is, the varied experiences that this, and in that sense, the term neighborhood comes handy to us. So, if we talk about mohalla, if we talk about para, if we talk about basti, these all encapsulate the idea of, this a spatial unit or location or the milieu, mahol, but neighborhood in that sense. And since we were writing in English, so neighborhood came a bit handy.
Thanks, Sadan. That's all I had. Patho, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, some interesting thoughts on I don't do this stuff, so you'll excuse me if I sound very naive. And I come from a discipline which doesn't engage with this kind of conceptual language. So to begin with the kind of discussion that we're just having. So and this relationship between space and kind of way of thinking about neighborhood, the para, effectiveness, and so on. So would you, if I put it to you, that do you consider the Delhi metro as a neighborhood? And especially for a lot of people, the experience of traveling with the same people every day, especially if you're doing it on a regular commute, the same space, you share most probably a fair amount of time, maybe have conversations, but it is not spatially fixed, or it is spatially fixed in a very different linear kind of space, right? To contrast that, if you take an apartment complex, when everybody is in spatial proximity, but there may be no relationship whatsoever between one apartment and the other. You may live, die, marry, divorce without knowing across the walls. So how does this two sort of examples complicate your spatial fixity of a neighborhood? That's one kind of, and especially in the context of the apartment, it's and since you mentioned Jankero and Simul. So the way I think of Simul is, and since you're talking about sensorial, is you think of altered sensorial, right? You think of people who dementia, stepped out from whatever is around them and they live their own lives. It's quite complete in themselves. And similar in some sense seems to think that the rural person is sort of erecting walls against this urban assault. In order to preserve, as you were saying, some element of core purity, ruralness, whatever. In an apartment complex, there's in some sense the same kind of walling off against a variety of sensorial experiences. I choose which sensory experience I sort of engage with. I might go out to the bar and have a completely different experience with a certain group of people, but I will not have any experience with my people. The apartment person is very urban in the way we think about it. Simul's character is not urban. How do you sort of propose these two kinds of positionalities?
That also speaks to the question that Sir was asking about, is the village reproduced in the, especially in Indian cities, is the village reproduced in some way? Is the web of relations really that different between the rural and the urban? So those kind of, just adding on to that.
Two things about, and finally, might want to. And to take one more example of this apartment story, when you're talking about Zakero, is one of the interesting things about Raj is Raj Kapoor finds different private lives as he goes through the night, right? And when you talk about a final kinship, you talked about fictive kinship in the context of what would be in your description of neighborhood or pada or whatever, that particular apartment complex. And yet, unless everybody in the apartment was quite comfortable with, knew everything about each other, then there was no reason for any of that to be sort of hidden and complex. So obviously the inference is one's neighbor does not know what the other neighbor is doing, right? And in that context, again, that sort of brings back to the full apartment story we're talking about, as to where does that sort of effective kinship stories sort of land in some sense, right? Yeah, so let's stay there. A couple of other things that are different, but we that are.
All right. Thank you for complicating the matter. If we are, Sadanji, once again, do you want to, are you active?
Yeah. Maybe after you, or you want me to come here?
You go first. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. I mean, see, just as I may be repeating here, we don't have all the answers, frankly speaking. So unless, and this whole thing grew up as a form of conversations. So different researchers, different people in this camaraderie, they informed us, and from their contributions, we came to know about one or another layers of what possibly neighborhood lives are all about, what is neighborliness is all about. So far in that sense, we have not been informed by anybody that we can theorize metro life in terms of the same way in which we can talk about, say, Adarsh Nagar or Model Town. So in that sense, I don't know. I can, based on my readings and whatever time I have devoted, I can say that personally speaking, and none of us can talk about the entire volume, because each contributors come from their own perspective, her or his own vantage point, disciplinary, interdisciplinary. But I can say from my personal readings, based on that I would be hesitant to call metro bondings as neighborhood bondings, because city produces different kinds of relationships, and each of these relationships have their own specificity. So I would not rush to jump and equate everything as neighborly in terms of their flavor. But there are bondings, and here I somehow, even though I don't agree that all the neighborhoods have to be a kind of bonded spatial unit, but this physical space is central somewhere in our project so far. And even in terms of where people have written about memory, or I have written about Paros and Parosi and Parosan, there is some kind of spatial sharing, and which is there, some kind of locationality. One can theorize that if you are traveling in metro or Mumbai local train, you also share the location, and therefore it can be a valid way of looking at neighborhood. I don't have quarrel with that, but I am not very certain on that.
Okay, thank you, Sadanji. I would just add a little bit to it, because this happens to be a very interactive project right from the beginning, and even now, Sadanji, if you can recall, after the first day of conference at Tezpur University in Assam, in the evening, precisely one of the questions that I was harping on that evening was precisely along this line. The second part of the question, which was also the question of this other gentleman, whether this is the reproduction of something rural. If you can remember the rural-urban question, which had come one evening after that conference, and in that spirit, a lot of things you had said, but one thing I distinctly remember is that, why not? If it is an optic, the optic can be taken anywhere. Yeah. So it is nobody suggesting that neighborhood is prerogative of urbanity alone. That is number one. Number two, but however, our interest is not here, and correct me if I'm wrong, our interest is never expressed as an interest to find the origin of something called neighborhood, or where exactly is this neighborhood? Can this be originated to urban space, or it can be originated to some other space? That has never been our exploration. If I understand correctly, and this is also my interjection on proposition on this point, that this is typically anthropological kind of truism. It's anthropological truism that where there are humans, there will be neighborhood, there will be settlement. There will be settlement, there will be neighborhood. We do not know whether that neighborhood, through that neighborhood, you get to see city or you get to see a village. That we do not know. What we know for sure is that whether it is hunter-gatherer society or society of software engineers, if they come together to reside at a place, there will be formation of this kind, which will be closer to something like neighborhood, even though we cannot be very categorical about its definitional features. That is number one. Number two, about the metro train. I think Sadanji already said, but I just to add more spices to it, sprinkle some, do some seasoning basically. So if we know of the stories. I basically try to understand things through stories. So we have heard of these stories. हमारे ज़माने में DU स्पेशल जाती थी, यहाँ से वहाँ जाती थी, मैं भी यहाँ से जाता था, हम लोग रोज सुबह इतने बजे ही चढ़ते थे, वो भी चढ़ती थी, मैं भी चढ़ता था, वो भी चढ़ता था, वो भी चढ़ती थी, वो वाला हमेशा उस वाले सीट पे बैठता था, वो वाला हमेशा उस वाले सीट पे बैठता था. So this was a regular affair for years. People telling this story that in a particular bus they will go and seat भी block हो गए थे, वो लड़की वहीं पे बैठेगी, वो लड़का वहीं पे बैठेगा, वो अंकल उधर ही आके बैठेंगे, and thereby the story remains in the memory. Now this kind of story becomes a kind of, it gives me passage, it encourages me to think of that neighborhood on the move, even though I'm not very sure as to what kind of characteristics of neighborhood I'm applying.
Yes, because if you think through the lens of neighborliness, then yes, some parts of these mobile neighborhoods can exhibit neighborliness.
No, but Mukta, this is where perhaps what Dev and me are trying to convey, that we are not trying to come up with a theory of neighborhood. And because we are not trying to come up with a theory of neighborhood, we are also quite scared when we replicate our vocabularies of neighborhood or neighborliness to something which we don't know. So we are not saying we cannot have the neighborliness in metro or Delhi bus, but we don't know yet from researches. And this is why we are scared. Another thing is, in terms of the rural and urban, we were also scared. So partly, as Dev said, idea of neighborhood and neighborliness can be easily applied in rural setting also. We were more or less focused on urban milieu, and that was a kind of narrowly focused perspective, you can say, but we wanted to intervene in urban study discourse also. And partly it is also because we are slightly uncomfortable with this binary of rural and urban. So, each time we talk about something which is less than urban in a city setting, we call it, reproduction of the rural in urban setting. That kind of, engagement, I am not comfortable with, because even when the lifestyle or the social relationships may not reflect to the quote unquote idea of the urban in many cities, it may not be appropriate to call them as rural getting reproduced in urban setting.
Yeah.
Because then we have a very specific fixed idea of what is urban.
Yeah.
And that fixed idea has its genesis in post-industrial Western Europe. So we were not very comfortable with that.
Yeah.
I had a question.
Yes.
It was.
Can you speak up because it's a
Yeah, so it was actually also motivated by Sir's what he said about a neighborhood. There is something like a physical space associated with the neighborhood. I was just wondering, like, in these engagements, have you come across like how the virtual space actually informs the physical space of the neighborhood? Because a lot of neighborhoods and a lot of gated communities, for example, for sure, have these WhatsApp chat, exactly, which, these housing complex, and a lot of conversations happen on these chats, which reflect how and what kind of maintenances, for example, happen in that complex, what festivals, who will participate in the festivals. There are Google forms which you have to fill and all of that. So this kind of neighborliness, which is translated to this virtual sphere. So wondering what kind of interactions, whether this came across in this research as well.
It's for you.
I can always answer. I mean, you should ask him. You don't.
Oh, you are asking me. I mean,
Yes,
Dave
sir.
is the speaker. I am not the speaker.
No. I can any day. Tomorrow they have a class with me. I can answer that.
No, but we want to hear what your answer is. She's asking it here in this space.
So no. Do you want to say something?
No,
What do
you
you-
go ahead.
No. So with this idea of Nilfa Madi thing that I was telling you,
Yeah.
there is this you can say. At another level, it's exactly that. When you think of this Nilfa Madi mediated relations, Nilfa Madi, where most of the identification. They don't tell each other you're behaving like that. They say you're behaving like that character in that television serial, right? And that's how the discussion begins. And then they will be, if they have to abuse each other, they will identify someone with some unacceptable or unsavory character. So like that, at a more, what should I say, more digitally microscopic level, particularly WhatsApp. I do not know. I'm not on Insta, so I'm not familiar with it. Insta has not entered this like everyday. No, not get it. It's everydayness, but it has some kind of everyday presence. Yeah, but this Insta is a bar.
It's the bar. Instead, not for
It's the
asking
bond
you
that-
about
Alcohol.
whether your child is going to come home late or whether you're going to fix something.
That is not for.
No,
That's-
this is
that's not-
social, right?
Insta has to have perform.
Yeah.
They rarely perform in WhatsApp groups on.
Yeah.
You scored.
So
Before, I haven't seen it with my.
but yeah, that way WhatsApp serves all kind of purposes. Insta has this high-end purpose of presentation of self.
Generational gap. It's
Yeah,
okay.
it is generation.
Yeah.
If I
Exactly. So our parents would not be
Pure
asking us.
observation, no participation.
No participation, zero participation. Yes, Saranji.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, WhatsApp groups can be, area of study because, and particularly the one thing that we highlighted, Dave has emphasized the sensuousness aspects, but we have also talked about the contested nature of these neighborhoods and the neighborliness. And in that sense, many of these WhatsApp groups of specific neighborhoods, specific societies, they are also very contested spaces. So in that sense, these can be valid field of inquiry, though none of our contributors focused on that so far. But we can do that, anybody can do that.
But on the apartments, what do you see these as? So, okay. But you see your neighborhoods in the city, how do you see them interact? You see the city as a herd of neighborhoods, or do you see the city as a menagerie? As an assortment of different, because a herd basically ढेर साथ है ना, एक साथ कहीं जाने का, एक दिशा है, कहीं पहुंचना है. So, and while they might have different paces and different routes and different, they're essentially moving in roughly the same direction. So, in your conceptualization of the neighborhood vis-a-vis the city, how do you conceptualize? Do you see them as having some element of a common purpose vis-a-vis the city? Or do you see them as essentially?
I would not say that it's such a formal, well thought out organization kind of thing. It is there. It's a spontaneous thing is there with the people in it without this consciousness of membership that I belong to this neighborhood. It's not like that. It's in that regard. Para may have that very clear enumeration of the this person lives. Falana Babu lives here on this address. When we think of neighborhood, it is that, but it is not only that. It can also be like just the surrounding, the ecology of experiences in which one is located. So it has at one level very concrete structure in which you have this street, this gully going to that area, and those addresses will be found on this in this lane, that by lane. But it is also about not only those gullies which are there, it's also about those passerby, those feriwalas who do not live in that gully. They're passing by, or those rediwalas who will come for a few hours.
And we have, if I add,
please.
We have been very clear that we were not looking at city versus neighborhoods. So city and neighborhoods were not like binaries to us. But whenever we think about city spaces, neighborhood spaces emerge quite spontaneously, because without neighborhood spaces, you cannot think of social lived city. So in that sense, it is the embodied space, even if it is a very high-rise, very alienating kind of environment of any society, but yet these societies then make the city, or without the city, you cannot conceive of these societies. So in that sense, it's a mutually interdependent spaces. And this is why we thought of looking at neighborhood as in-between space. This in-betweenness between the house and the city, that in-betweenness gave us this analytical advantage to look at the relation between city and neighborhood. I'm not sure if this answered, this responded to the question raised.
No, but if you're doing an in-betweenness, then there is a certain possibility of a common purpose.
Yes. But because it is in-betweenness, there is also a gap.
Okay. So the very well.
Yeah, I think
it's an
okay,
interesting.
you have more to say.
Yeah, it is. By the way, on the metro, if you haven't read her work, I would definitely recommend looking up Rashmi Sadhana's work. She's
Yeah,
also
yeah.
published. And I think some of this issue of
Yes, that
how
is.
you think about relationships in the metro would be an interesting.
Yeah, I am aware of Rasmi's work, and also there are works on Mumbai local trains.
Mhm.
But this is where perhaps I was thinking conservatively, and this speaks only for me, not the entire group. So, as I said, we are open to, and we were open to contributions, because no contributions came on the metro. So this is why I don't want to jump into conclusions. I'm open to possibilities, but I mean, I was speaking from my limited understanding, of course.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sadan, and thank you for holding fort.
No,
So
it's
thank you, everyone who is here. I'm amazed that we still have some participants left. But yeah, I think we started with a good crowd of 30-35 people, and as we got deeper and deeper, some people
Yeah.
wandered off.
Can I make my personal request public?
Yes.
Whoever is left on the screen, can they just turn on their camera for a second?
No, this is a webinar. It's
Oh,
not a Zoom meeting, so we
I
can't
see.
do what you're asking.
Oh, sorry.
That's the problem.
Anyway.
We will stand outside and we will take a picture.
No, but that may not be possible. My university has asked me, Sadanji,
You can shut off the.
to. Okay. Yeah. Better not to